David Hunn broke this story at STLtoday.com where the St. Louis Zoo is in talks to buy legendary Grant's Farm. These are two cultural icons. To talk about it, Jeffrey Bonner, St. Louis Zoo President and CEO. Thank you very much for joining us, Jeffrey.
My pleasure.
How did this all come about?
Oh, about a year and a half, the trust that operates Grant's Farm came to us and said, we're going to sell the farm. We think that you would be a great buyer for the farm. What would you consider paying for it, and what would you do if you had it? So we kind of put on our thinking caps and said, well, this is what we would do, and here would be the advantages, not just for Grant's Farm, but for the St. Louis Zoo, and that's really the genesis.
So you were minding your own business, and the phone rang one day.
Yeah.
And so now the story comes out. Now we're in a little bit of a sticky wicket, I guess, because the Bush family is now fighting over that original phone call, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the Bush family wishes that they could talk about this privately among themselves. There was a court document that was unsealed, and so suddenly it becomes public. And my heart goes out to them. This is a very passionate, emotional issue. Of course, it's their heritage, their estate. I just wish that they, we just left them alone so they could work this out.
Do you have any fight in this lawsuit, or are you just an innocent bystander waiting for this lawsuit to be sort of adjudicated through the family?
Yeah, we're, as you put it, an innocent bystander. If the court asked us to come in and say, what would you do, so that they could make a better decision, of course we would adhere to the court's wishes. But yeah, it's for them to work out. The St. Louis Zoo stands ready. We will do whatever they want us to do. I think, though, that we have to recognize that it's not our zoo, it's your zoo. We have the honor of taking care of it for you. So in the end, we have to come back to you all and say, now, what do you want us to do?
Would you be okay if you leased, if the Bush family leased the land to the zoo?
Well, depending on how that lease was structured, but if we had to pay for the land and then find funds to maintain the animals at the high standard of the St. Louis Zoo, we don't see how we could do that. I mean, we would need additional resources to do that. Our problem is the ark is full. We had the head of U.S. Fish and Wildlife over yesterday, and they had come to us and said there's a vicious, venomous tree snake. It's making its way to the island of Saipan. Can you come, collect those birds, and save them because they're going to go extinct? What do you say to that? How can you possibly turn that down? But the whole basement of the birdhouse is full of birds. We're just out of space. And when you look at these larger animals, we call them ungulates, but hoofstock, antelope, they just require a lot of space, and they're expensive to maintain, but we have to do it. We consider it a sacred obligation. We have to do this.
Okay, so what about the cost? If you floated an idea of a tax, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, I got to say that people jump to that conclusion. It probably wasn't a good thing to do. From our point of view, everything's on the table. Everything's on the table. So, we can get community support through budget lines from different counties, for example, and that's not a direct tax. There could be a property tax. There could be a sales tax. There's all sorts of possibilities. But, again, you need to tell us what you want to do it and the level to which you want to do it. Otherwise, we simply don't go ahead. In the end, you guys make the decision, not us.
So ultimately, if the community rallies around and somehow creates some type of funding mechanism for the zoo to maintain this, you'd be willing and able and happy to oblige.
And I think that as a consequence, Grant's Farm would be much better. When the tram pass would be much longer, you'd see way more different kinds of animals. You'd see more different animals. I think the experience would be much richer, and the St. Louis Zoo would be better off. But you're right. That's a decision for the community. They need to make that decision. We hope that they allow us to make Grant's Farm a better place. But first things first, the family has to decide, and the courts and the trust has to decide what the best thing is.
So just so I understand you, Jeffrey Bonner, president of the St. Louis Zoo and CEO, you're open to any situation once the family, if Billy Bush takes the big house and a small plot of land for this and that, you're willing to sort of work with them to take over as much or as little as they want to give?
No, we're really not. I mean, when we went into this, we said not only do we need all of this property, but we need all of Andy's property, which is not owned by the trust, but is adjacent. That's where the parking lot is and where the Clydesdales are. And they did say, how about if we took 50 acres and put a brewery on it? And we said, well, the loss of land is important, but more importantly than that, there's the odors that are attendant on a brewery. We actually think the animals would get used to that, but you've got a lot of commercial activity, trucks going and coming in. We just didn't feel it was the right thing for the animals. So, we'll consider it. Of course, we would consider it. We listen to everything. I just think that some of the ideas that have been thrown out there probably won't work.
Who would be the one who would be in charge of putting some type of tax, a regional tax, because the city is different than the county, different from St. Charles? What entity would step forward and say, I'm going to spearhead this for a community conversation?
Yeah, well, of course, it would have to go through the legislature, and I think one of the reasons why people jumped on a sales tax was, it's a mechanism that could go, be the same in every county. So there's a fairness issue there that I think that addresses. But I think in answer to your question, my guess would be that Mr. Stenger, who can't lose Grants Farm on his watch, I mean, he just would not allow that to happen, would probably likely take an initiative and try and get other counties to pull their fair share. Like I say, admission would be on the table if they didn't. And that's one of the reasons why you can imagine a county like Franklin or Jefferson or St. Charles saying, let's take it out of our regular budget line as long as our folks can get in for free.
AB InBev said they would donate $27 million to this $30 million purchase price. Were there any strings attached to that?
Yeah, well, in the first place, that's not quite right. And the coverage of this thing has been excellent. But they kind of got that one a little wrong. It was $28.5 million, and then there was another $3.5 million that the trust owed AB that they would forgive if the zoo purchased it. And then there's all the stuff that's there. Those trams, if they were new, would cost about $1 million. So that's a substantially larger number than what was reported, well over $30 million.
But were there any strings attached to that number?
Well, no strings attached. However, they would like to do a 10-year sponsorship deal, and that's how you get free beer. And then after 10 years, they'd like to look at renewals going forward. If they feel that the farm is well run, that it's exciting, that it represents their tradition well. Remember, they've operated it since 1954.
Right.
They love this place. It's a big part of their community culture.
Jeffrey Bonner, St. Louis Zoo President and CEO, thank you for coming in, and we reserve the right to bring you back at any time.
Yes, sir.
You got it. 712 here, Big 550, KTRS.